The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom of the New York Charity Gala was thick with anticipation. The evening was supposed to be an elegant gathering, one that celebrated goodwill, with high-profile figures from society in attendance. Beneath the sparkling chandeliers, philanthropists and media elites mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging opinions on the latest news. Amid this glittering scene stood Melania Trump, the guest of honor, draped in an exquisite midnight blue gown. Despite the constant political controversies surrounding her husband, she had maintained an air of calm composure, focusing on charitable causes rather than the chaos of politics. Tonight was no exception. As she stepped up to the stage to deliver her speech on children's education and humanitarian efforts, the crowd fell silent in anticipation. Her words were calm yet assured, with her Slovenian accent adding a touch of refinement. But just as she neared the end of her speech, a sharp voice broke through the air like a dagger. "Mrs. Trump, how does it feel to be complicit in your husband's agenda?" The question was biting, laced with mockery. A tall, impeccably dressed journalist, widely known for his liberal views, stood near the front. His microphone was poised, ready for attack. This was David Calloway, a political correspondent notorious for his biting critiques of conservatives. He had long masked his personal biases under the guise of journalistic objectivity. The room became still. Guests shifted in their seats, exchanging knowing glances. They realized this was not going to be a normal Q&A session. Melania's lips parted slightly, preparing to respond, but before she could speak, Calloway pressed further. "Your husband has been accused of dividing the nation, of inciting hatred," he said, his voice growing sharper. "And yet, you stand here, portraying yourself as a role model. Don't you think the true role models are those resisting him?" The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy with tension. Some journalists smirked, sensing they were on the verge of a viral moment. But before Melania could offer a reply, another voice broke through the silence, a voice strong, firm, and resolute. "That's enough." Everyone turned to see Baron Trump stepping forward from the crowd. Gone was the reserved boy who once occupied the halls of the White House. Now, at 17, he stood tall, exuding the poise of someone used to public scrutiny. He wasn't just the son of a former president. He was his own person, and in this moment, he wasn't going to allow anyone to disrespect his mother. With squared shoulders and a clenched jaw, Baron strode past the tables, his presence commanding attention. He stepped onto the stage, positioning himself between his mother and the reporter, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Calloway, momentarily surprised, arched an eyebrow. But Baron didn't flinch. "You can ask tough questions," he said, his voice unwavering. "But this isn't journalism. This is harassment." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Calloway, clearly caught off guard, let out a brief, breathy laugh, attempting to brush off the moment. "Oh, and I suppose the president's son is about to lecture me on media ethics." Baron's gaze never wavered. His eyes locked with Calloway's, unwavering and focused. "No," he responded smoothly. "I'm going to show you what respect looks like." The tension in the room escalated from an undercurrent to an overwhelming force. All eyes were now fixed on Baron. No one had expected him to step up like this, not with such composed determination. Calloway, the outspoken journalist who had initiated the confrontation, was still processing the unexpected turn of events. He had expected nervousness, hesitation, or perhaps a moment of uncertainty, a slip-up he could exploit for a viral soundbite. What he hadn't counted on was Baron Trump standing firm. For a moment, the smirk on Calloway's face faltered. He quickly regained his composure, chuckling dryly. "Respect," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Forgive me, Baron, but I don't think you or your family are in any position to lecture the press on respect." A few chuckles echoed through the audience, uncertain, uneasy. Some remained motionless, watching the unfolding drama. Baron stood tall, shoulders squared, his voice steady as he responded. "You can ask whatever questions you want," he said, his tone unwavering. "But what you just did, that wasn't a question. You tried to embarrass my mother." Calloway's smirk wavered again, but he didn't back down. Mrs. Trump is a public figure, he said. She should expect tough questions. Barron took a deliberate step forward, forcing Calloway to look up at him. Then why didn't you ask about her work tonight? About the children she's helping? The question was simple, yet it carried weight. The crowd shifted, sensing the directness of the question. Calloway, taken aback, had no real answer. His job wasn't to highlight Melania's contributions. It was to turn her into a political target. Barron pressed on, his voice steady. You came here for one reason, to make headlines. You didn't care about the purpose of this event. You wanted a viral clip, something to post on Twitter to rack up a few thousand likes from people who already agree with you. The room fell silent. The energy in the ballroom had shifted. No one had anticipated this. Barron's composed, determined response had changed the entire atmosphere. Even Calloway, known for his sharp, biting critiques, was left momentarily speechless. The tension was palpable, but Barron wasn't backing down. He was standing up for his mother, and no one in that room could ignore the power of his words. Exchanging glances, the crowd quickly realized that Barron wasn't simply reacting. He was controlling the entire moment. Calloway's once confident demeanor began to falter. He glanced around at the other journalists in the room, almost searching for someone to back him up. But no one spoke up. They weren't used to being challenged like this, especially not by a Trump, and certainly not by a 17-year-old. Melania, who had quietly remained behind her son, rested a gentle hand on his arm. She didn't need words to express her pride. Her expression said it all: pride, resilience, and the silent message, I'm right here with you. Realizing he was losing his grip on the situation, Calloway tried to regain control. He forced a smirk and crossed his arms. You're young, Barron, he said, shaking his head. You don't understand how this works. Barron didn't blink. He responded smoothly, I know exactly how this works. I've watched people like you go after my family since I was a kid. Calloway's smirk disappeared entirely. Barron stepped forward once more, his voice unwavering. I just never imagined you'd be desperate enough to target a woman who's done nothing but try to help others. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back even let out a quiet gasp. Even some journalists, who had expected another routine takedown of a Trump, were stunned into silence for a moment. Calloway's face flushed slightly, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Barron's right, a man said. He was well-dressed in a tailored suit, older with salt and pepper hair. His confident demeanor suggested he was someone who commanded attention, a businessman, maybe even a donor. He locked eyes with Calloway. This is a charity event, he said. This isn't the place for petty political ambushes. Murmurs rippled through the room again. A few heads nodded in agreement. For the first time that evening, David Calloway looked uncertain. His moment of dominance was slipping away, and Barron Trump was far from done. The silence in the ballroom was thick, charged with tension and anticipation. Every gaze was fixed on Barron. No one had ever seen a Trump challenge the media like this, not with anger, not with distraction, but with cold, deliberate precision. He wasn't lashing out. He was systematically dismantling Calloway, piece by piece. Calloway, the once assured liberal journalist, clenched his jaw. He had come expecting to bait the young Trump into a mistake, some awkward blunder that would become headline news. Instead, he had walked straight into a storm he hadn't anticipated. Barron Trump, standing his ground. But Calloway wasn't done yet. He forced out a chuckle, shaking his head as if to dismiss Barron entirely. You know, Barron, he said, it's easy to defend your family when you've been raised in a tower of privilege. But out here in the real world, people like me have to ask the difficult questions. That's what journalism is. A few familiar faces in the crowd instinctively nodded, but something felt off. The usual rhythm of media attacks wasn't landing tonight. Calloway's words sounded strained, almost desperate. Barron tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth hinting at a smirk. He had him. Oh, you mean the real world? Barron said, gesturing toward the audience. How many people here came tonight to support children? To talk about education and giving back? A few hands went up, and others nodded. Even those who weren't Trump supporters hadn't come for a political battle. They were here for the cause. Barron turned back to Calloway. And how many of you showed up just to watch him turn this into a spectacle about himself? The crowd stirred, and a few quiet laughs spread across the room. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. Calloway was no longer steering the moment. He started to speak, but Barron cut him off. "No, really," Barron said, pausing as if waiting for an answer. "Because from where I stand, the only person who thought this was about politics was you." Scattered applause broke out. It wasn't just polite, it was approving. Barron had just flipped the script, and everyone knew it. With his arms crossed, Barron locked eyes with Calloway like a predator assessing its prey. "You came here hoping to humiliate my mother," he said, "and instead, you humiliated yourself." The room erupted. Even those who weren't Trump supporters recognized what had just happened. Barron had done something no one had seen before. He had outmaneuvered the media at their own game. Calloway's face flushed with frustration. He opened his mouth to respond, but the moment had already slipped away from him. His self-assurance, his cockiness, it had all vanished. Then, to seal his victory, Barron leaned in slightly and delivered the final blow with effortless composure. "Next time, if you want to go after a Trump," he said, "maybe pick on someone their own size." The ballroom erupted in applause. Calloway went rigid, unable to come up with a retort. He had played his game, but tonight he had lost. As Barron turned back toward his mother, poised and unwavering, one thing was undeniable to everyone in the room. The youngest Trump had just left his mark. The applause still echoed as Calloway grasped the full weight of his defeat. His once confident smirk had disappeared, replaced by a strained, artificial expression. He struggled to maintain composure, but it was clear to everyone. Everything had collapsed around him. Barron stood tall, his posture strong, his gaze unwavering. He had seized the moment, and the audience recognized it. Calloway was no longer the hunter, he had become the hunted. But the journalist wasn't ready to concede just yet. He adjusted his tie and forced a chuckle. "So, that's it?" he asked, attempting to sound unfazed.